Okay, so let's keep talking about what happens with populations as they grow. So a lot of populations, like I mentioned in the last lecture, a lot of populations will exhibit growth when the number of females reaches a critical number. And what that number is, it just varies based upon what species you're looking at. There's no magic number of 15 and boom, you grow. It's going to vary. It's going to vary based on the reproductive methods, based on the survivorship curves, based on all sorts of different factors. But usually they exhibit that exponential growth, and then they hit carrying capacity and things level off. That is what populations want to do, is try to maintain themselves at carrying capacity. Oop. So I want to put this up here. Carrying capacity, I know I mentioned it, but this is an important thing to remember. Carrying capacity, this is going to be the maximum Okay, so a couple big key things to point out here. Let me clean this up a little bit. All right, so carrying capacity, maximum number of individuals, and environment, community, whatever we want to call it, can support naturally. So when we look at carrying capacity, every ecosystem has one. Every environment has a predetermined carrying capacity. X fish per acre of water. X deer per acre of woods. X bacteria per pound of person, and so on and so on and so on. There's only so many individuals that your environment can support because of the food chain and how energy flows. So if you guys remember energy from earlier bio courses, energy gets transferred from one individual to the next, to the next, to the next when it's being consumed. That determines the flow of energy. That's the carrying capacity. One of the biggest factors that determines a carrying capacity is the producer base. The bigger your producer base, typically the larger the carrying capacity of the environment. Now, all of you sitting there going, okay, producers. I want you to think and develop a list in your head, and I would encourage on paper. Let me change this just a little bit. I want you to figure out what are the factors that determine or influence the size of the producer base. This is the connections, you guys, I want you to start looking at. Abiotic factors influence producer base determines carrying capacity determines the number of fish, deer, bacteria, etc. that survive in your community. It's all connected. This is the ecology field. Okay, so here's a great example. And we have just a long history of these examples. There's lots and lots and lots of these examples out there. This is just one that I like to highlight. So back in I'm going to get the pen out, and it's going to be kind of ugly chicken scratching, but I want you guys to see these numbers. 1944, St. Matthews Island. It's a little island off of the coast of Alaska. Nobody lives here. Researchers put 29 reindeer out on the island. Males and females. There's plenty of Can you guys tell me what these are? What plant group would be out here on this island? And it's not grass. But there's a producer base. 29 reindeer. Reindeer tend to be type 1 survivorship curve. So they live a long life, and then they die of old age if they don't get killed by a hunter or predator. So a reindeer might live 6 to 8 years. It takes a reindeer about 1.5 years before it can reproduce. When it reproduces, they might have twins, 2 kids per reproductive cycle for a female. Mom's going to take care of the babies, try to raise the babies, very parallel to what white-tailed deer are doing. And then those 2 kids grow up. 1 year to 2 years later, they can reproduce. Okay, so 1944, 29 reindeer. Thing to mention, there's no disease on the island and no predators. It's an island. There's no hunting, and there are no wolves, there are no bears, there are no predators killing these reindeer. So, hey, things look good, 1944. 13 years later, 1957. So all of your original reindeer are dead of old age. Because remember, they live 6 to 8 years. So all of these original reindeer died by the time 1950 to 1952 rolled around. It's 1957. Survey of the population. 1,350 reindeer are now running around playing reindeer games excuse me, on the island. Oh, exponential growth. Population is going up. All right, still plenty of vegetation. Remember, no predators, no diseases. 1962. Group comes back, does another population count. 6,000 reindeer on the island. Major exponential growth. It's 1962. 1964. Comes back, 47 reindeer left alive out of the 6,000 that were there 2 years earlier. So the population, let me change this a bit. The population did exponential growth, but then they did a massive crash. What happened was that the population of reindeer overshot carrying capacity. So the island had a carrying capacity. It could hold so many reindeer per acre. They overshot it because they were reproducing too fast for that island, too fast for those environmental conditions. And when you overshoot carrying capacity, you will crash. Every single population does this, unless you have the ability to raise the carrying capacity. If you can raise the carrying capacity, oh, go back into my yellow line. If you can raise the carrying capacity, then your population will level off. But if carrying capacity drops, oh, we've just had habitat destruction. And now your population is up here. It's going to all of a sudden, it's going to drop real quick because the carrying capacity can't support it. And it's going to shoot way down. Now, we leave it alone, it will rebound and it will slowly come back up and maybe hit exponential growth and level off at the new carrying capacity and do something like that. But this happens. We have data, we have the research showing this happens when populations overshoot carrying capacity. Okay, so when we're looking at this issue, there are different limiting factors that regulate population growth. So those limiting factors are essential. We need them to help control population growth. Things like disease. No, we don't like parasites and disease, but they kill members of the population and control growth. Predators. Everybody's sad when the lion kills the baby gazelle, but that controls the population of gazelle. Food, water, resources, habitat, etc. These are all factors that control and regulate population growth. When you get rid of things like disease and predators, now your population is going to grow. Consider what happened with deer, white-tailed deer in the United States. We have a larger deer herd than ever in the history of the country. It's bigger than it was when the Indians were here, where the Indians were the primary population in the US. They're still here. But you think about it, we have massively increased food availability for things like white-tailed deer. They're planting it right now. Thousands of acres of corn and beans. You're giving the deer a food source. We've eliminated their predators other than vehicles. There's water. They have the resources. Habitat, they're pretty adaptable. I mean, these animals can live in marginal habitat. So when you increase the amount of food, you just increase the carrying capacity, and you got rid of these. So it's no shock why we have such a big deer herd, because humans have caused that. Now, when populations get pressure and stress and things control their growth, the controlling factors come in two different categories. Category one is called density independent. Oh, I'll bring that other one back in a second. So density independent. The population size does not play a role in controlling the growth of the population. Typically, density independent factors are abiotic factors. Fires, they don't care how big your population is. Floods, hurricanes, droughts. It makes no difference if you have 2 or 2,000 individuals. That's still going to happen. The density dependent factors, oh, can't spell that. All right, density dependent factors are things that the population size does influence. Oh, that's too big, sorry. I'm trying to balance this out here. Okay, so the population size does influence the growth of the population. So think about something like a disease. Why do we see larger urban areas suffering more from the COVID-19 virus? Because they're congested, they're packed together. Why would predators be more likely to attack a herd versus a lone individual? Well, if I'm going to chase down an animal, I'd rather go and find 3,000 zebra in a herd than try to find the one lone animal out there by itself. So diseases, predators, competition, etc., factors that all influence population based on the size are what we call density dependent factors. Okay? So when we look at natural populations, they tend to follow these rules. This is how natural populations work. When humans get into the picture is where we start messing things up. So what we're going to talk about in the next lecture is how we take all of these things we've discussed with ecology and we apply them to the human population. Because we're part of this. We're part of the ecological system, and we need to understand how we fit and how these models apply to us. So we'll get into that in part 3 of